The summit was 3 days from its close, and Rin Calder had not slept more than 4 hours in a row since it opened. That was standard for this kind of work. The Havath Accords had drawn delegations from 9 systems to the station orbiting Verath Prime, and where 9 systems gathered with their political weight in the same pressurized corridor of space, the security calculus became genuinely complicated. Rin's team handled the outer ring, the public corridors, the reception halls, the transit nodes where a delegate might pass from a formal session to a dining room with nothing between them, and whatever the station's background noise carried in. He had been doing this for 11 years, 4 summits before this one, 3 state visits. A renegotiation session that had nearly broken into open dispute twice in 2 days. He knew what the threat profile for an event like this looked like when it was normal. The baseline anxiety of concentrated political weight, the low-level surveillance operations every delegation ran on every other delegation as a matter of professional habit, the rare but not unprecedented presence of individuals whose interest in the summit was not procedural. He had developed a specific instinct for the difference between those categories, not because he was uniquely talented, but because he had paid attention across enough postings to know what each one felt like. He knew what it felt like when something was wrong. He had not been able to articulate it precisely until the morning of the 3rd day. Nothing in the pre-summit brief had flagged an active threat against any particular delegation. What he was reading was not an intelligence item. It was the texture of the crowd, the pattern of attention in the outer corridors, the way certain people looked at certain other people and then looked away too quickly, the way the foot traffic in the East Transit node clustered and dispersed at intervals that didn't match the session schedule's natural flow. He had filed a note with the station security lead at 600 on the 2nd day, upgrading his internal alert level for the Sovereign's transit route. Then he had gone to stand his post outside the Voreth delegation's suite with the particular quality of stillness that had taken him years to develop, the kind that looked like patience and was actually readiness. The Sovereign of the Voreth continuance was named a Chavel. He had not expected that to matter to him. He had met her on the first evening, which was not how this kind of work usually went. At this level, a protective detail did not interact with the principal. You stood outside the door, you cleared the route, you walked the room 20 minutes ahead of arrival and confirmed sight lines and egress. You did not speak to the person you were guarding unless they were in motion and needed to be moved, and even then you spoke functionally, direction, timing, confirmation. A Chavel changed that on the first evening by the straightforward mechanism of walking up to him and speaking directly to him. He had been standing at the east entrance, the secondary entrance, the one she had been routed through for time efficiency, and she had come through the inner door at 1845 and stopped 3 feet from him with the specific quality of intention that told him this was not accidental proximity. "You are the one they assigned to this corridor," she said, in clear standard without an interpreter. "Yes, Sovereign." She studied him with eyes the color of deep amber lit from behind, fractured at the iris into something that caught light like faceted stone. Her skin was the pale silver gray of the Voreth high lineage. He had read the species profile in the pre-event brief, but the brief had not fully prepared him for the quality of attention in her face, which was precise and without performance. She was taller than he was by about 4 inches. Her hair was white, worn back in an arrangement that suggested formality without elaborate ornamentation. She wore the continuance's colors, deep navy and pale silver, in a formal drape, with what he recognized from the brief as a rank indicator along the left collar. A narrow band of a different silver, slightly deeper, that carried encoding he didn't have the clearance to read. What he could read was her face. That was his actual work, and her face told him several things quickly. She was not making small talk. She was not performing the courtesy that a senior dignitary sometimes extended to protective detail as an affectation. She was here because she had a specific question and had decided to ask the most direct source of it. "You filed a corridor reassessment this morning," she said. He had not known she would be informed of that. The filing was an internal document, routed through the station security lead. That she had seen it either meant someone in her detail had shared it or she had access to the station security feed directly, neither of which was a small thing. "I did." "Why?" He considered the question. The professional answer was that she did not need his reasoning. The security office needed his reasoning, and he had provided it. But she had asked him directly, and she was looking at him in the manner of someone who would register a deflection immediately and draw the correct conclusion from it. "The crowd texture in the outer ring doesn't match the summit profile," he said. "There are people moving through this station who aren't here for the summit in any official capacity. Alone, that's not unusual. Visitor traffic continues around the summit's perimeter. But the movement patterns in the East Transit node are wrong. Not consistently wrong, not demonstrably wrong, just inconsistent with the baseline in a way I don't have a better word for yet." "Crowd texture," she said, as though testing the phrase. "It's a pattern of attention and movement. You develop a read for it over time." "What does it tell you?" "That I don't want your route through the outer ring to be predictable." She held his gaze for a moment. "Thank you for telling me that directly." And she walked into the reception. He stood outside the door for the next 3 hours and turned over what had just happened. In 11 years of protective work, across 4 summits and 3 state visits, and a dozen other high-profile postings, the principles he had guarded had ranged from openly oblivious to carefully insulated. People who moved through their security apparatus the way they moved through a well-designed building, without thinking about the engineering. Not one of them had come to him directly to ask about a filed note. Not one of them had asked why. A Chauvel had read the filing. She had come to ask him about it herself rather than routing the question through her own detail. She had asked a specific question and waited for a specific answer, and registered what he told her without asking him to soften it. He filed a second note at 2200, recommending that the East Corridor transit route be varied each evening. The recommendation was approved within the hour. The second day was the kind of day that a summit on its middle leg produced. Dense, continuous, the motion of 9 delegations and 40 scheduled sessions, and 100 small crises of precedence and translation and diplomatic phrasing that had to be resolved before they became mid-sized crises. Rin did not stop moving for 12 hours. He cleared 4 rooms before their principals entered. He walked 2 transit routes at times that did not match the published schedule, which was the point. He spent an hour in conference with the station security lead working through the camera coverage of the outer ring, and identifying 3 angles that were either genuinely inadequate or being deliberately exploited, and he could not yet determine which. He spent another hour in a corridor outside the main session chamber watching the aid traffic, the people who moved between delegation rooms with documents and messages and requests, who were necessary and ubiquitous, and therefore nearly invisible, and who were, in his experience, the most useful category to watch when something was wrong. He saw her 3 times. The first, a session transit at 1100 from the main conference chamber to a smaller annex room. She moved with her detail in the formation he had studied in the pre-event brief, 2 ahead, 1 back, close right and close left, and she moved within it the way a person who understood security logistics moved within it, efficiently, without friction, not fighting the formation structure. He was on the corridor outside. She passed him without stopping, but she glanced at him as she went. It was the same quality of attention she had given him the night before, direct, registering, not a performance of recognition. He noted it and went back to watching the aid traffic. The second, a corridor crossing at the junction between the inner and outer ring, where the foot traffic was densest in the early afternoon. She was in the middle of what appeared to be a focused conversation with two advisors in Vorath, and she should not have been aware of him specifically in the crowd's density. He was not at a marked post. He had moved 18 minutes earlier to a position near the junction's secondary column, which had better sight lines toward the east node, and was not one of the positions the summit's published security map showed as staffed. There was no reason for her to find him in that crowd. She found him anyway. As she passed the junction, she looked over her shoulder, not at the security post, not at the space near the door, but directly at the column where he was standing, and held his eyes for a moment before turning back to her advisors without breaking stride. He stood where he was for a moment after she passed. He was not sure exactly what to do with the specific quality of being found by someone who had no documented reason to know where to look. The third, the evening reception, east entrance again. She stopped longer this time. "The route was varied this morning," she said. "Yes." It was smoother. The timing was better than yesterday. "We had better camera coverage on the alternate. The transition point at the north corridor is easier to manage." She nodded, considering. "I asked my detail lead who had made the original recommendation. He told me it had come through the station security lead." "That's accurate. But you filed the second note, the one recommending the variation." "Yes. Before your shift started." "He didn't know you had done it on your own time." He considered what to say to that. "I wanted to file it while the reasoning was still in front of me. It's easier to explain the logic before the workday abstracts it." "Before your shift," she said again. "You thought about the route change on your own time and documented it so the recommendation would be clear. The work doesn't pause because the shift does." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between assessment and something warmer, a quality that was different from the professional precision she had shown in every other exchange. "You have been doing this a long time," she said. 11 years. And you still notice crowd texture on the third summit day when you have not slept enough. "The texture is actually clearer this morning than yesterday," he said. "I'm not sure if that means the problem is resolving or sharpening." She was quiet for a moment. "I find that I trust your uncertainty more than I would trust false confidence." He didn't answer because there was nothing useful to add, and she walked into the reception, and he stood outside the door. For the next 3 hours, he thought about what she had said. In 11 years of this work, no principal had said anything like that to him. Most principals barely saw him. He was a piece of the structure that kept them safe and therefore, like all functional structure, did not require acknowledgement. The ones who acknowledged him did it in the way you acknowledged a door that opened reliably, a brief, depersonalized functional appreciation. She had asked him why. She had registered his uncertainty as something valuable. She had noticed and said directly that he had filed the second note on his own time. He told himself firmly that none of this was relevant to the work. He had a threat profile to monitor, a summit on its final days with the crowd texture still wrong, and a route assessment to revise before morning. He revised the route assessment. He did not stop thinking about what she had said. The morning of the third day, Rin Calder woke at 500 with the specific quality of alertness that he had learned, across 11 years, to take seriously. It was not anxiety. Anxiety had a different texture, a diffuse, unfocused urgency that spread over everything without pointing anywhere specific. This was something more precise than anxiety. This was the instinct that something had shifted overnight, and the shift had not yet appeared in any of the data sources he was monitoring. He was dressed and on the outer ring by 5:30. The station's morning cycle was well underway, lighting at its daylight register, environmental systems in morning ventilation, service staff moving through the maintenance corridors in the patterns that had been consistent for 3 days. Rin did 3 things. He walked the full outer ring transit route that the sovereign's afternoon session schedule would require, noting which points had clean sight lines from the camera grid, and which had corners that the grid's current angles didn't fully cover. He reviewed the camera log from the overnight cycle at the East Transit node, specifically the 4-hour window between 100 and 500, when the station's regular activity was at its lowest. And then he stood at the junction of the inner and outer rings for 15 minutes and watched the morning foot traffic. By 600 he knew. He could not prove it. Nothing in the camera record constituted actionable intelligence on its own. What he had was a figure, appearing twice in the overnight log, at the entry vestibule and near the corridor leading to the reception hall, who did not appear in any registered delegate or staff list, who moved with a quality of deliberate inconspicuousness that was itself a kind of signal to someone who had spent 11 years watching how people moved in spaces where they were or were not supposed to be. Separately, each sighting was unremarkable. Together, they mapped a line that ran through the East Transit node and ended near the most exposed point on the sovereign's scheduled afternoon route. He filed the note at 6:02. He requested a full route change. The sovereign's afternoon transit moved to the inner ring entirely, eliminating the outer corridor exposure. He attached the 2 camera grabs and the movement mapping he had built in his head over the overnight review, rendered into a diagram he drew by hand in the filing system's notes field. By 700, the route change was approved. By 720, he had walked the inner ring route twice and identified the 2 points where the camera grid's coverage was thinnest, not because the cameras were badly placed, but because the inner ring's architecture had been designed for movement efficiency rather than security monitoring, and there were corners. He was standing at the first thin point, a junction between the secondary conference corridor and the small reception vestibule that served the afternoon session room, when he saw, at 7:40, the figure from the camera log come around the corner from the service corridor. He was holding something. Rin moved. He did not think. That was the thing he had never been able to fully explain to anyone who hadn't done this work. At the moment when thinking would consume the margin, you did not think. Your body moved from the hours of preparation, from the route map he had built through the morning walk, from the read he had developed on this space across 3 days of standing in it and walking through it and looking at it from every angle the work required. He was between the figure and the vestibule door when the figure's arm came up. He registered several things simultaneously. The figure was not carrying anything that would leave a ballistic signature, nothing that would trigger the station's automated sensor grid. What he was carrying was older and simpler than that. A blade. Long, narrow, the kind that could be smuggled through a sensor scan in sections, in different pockets worn by different people who reconvened in a service corridor, assembled in 30 seconds and used once. He registered the blade. He registered that the vestibule door was opening from the inside. He registered that a Chevelle had come through the door 2 minutes ahead of her scheduled transit, alone, without her detail, at the worst possible junction. He moved. The blade was aimed at the angle where she would have been standing when the door finished opening. He got there first. The impact was on his left side, below the ribs, a deep cut, not a puncture, which mattered for what would happen next but not for what was happening now. The figure's arm had been moving fast and the intercept had changed the angle and the depth, and what he felt was a white-hot line along his left side that immediately settled into a dull, heavy weight. What was happening now? The figure was running down the service corridor east fast. What was happening now? A Chevelle was standing in the doorway and Rin was between her and the place where the threat had been. He turned to look at her. She was looking at him. Her face had gone very still, not frozen with shock, not the performed calm of someone suppressing panic, but the genuine stillness of a person whose mind had shifted into its most efficient mode. He recognized that quality. He used it himself. "Get back inside," he said. His voice was even. He was using the part of his mind that stayed operational under adrenaline, the part he had spent 11 years building, that he had never been more grateful for than at this exact moment. Call your detail. Tell them there is an active threat and a likely weapon in the East Service corridors. Tell them the suspect went east. Give them my description of the weapon class, ceramic blade, approximately 20 centimeters, no ballistic signature. She did not move. Sovereign. He used the designation to pull her focus, the same way you pulled anyone's focus when the moment required a specific kind of attention. The corridor is not yet secured. Please go inside. Your detail needs confirmation of your position before they can sweep. Her eyes moved from his face to the corridor behind him, doing the same rapid assessment he had watched her perform in every other space they had been in together, registering the angles, taking in the sight lines, running the same calculation he ran, faster than he would have expected from someone who had not spent 11 years doing this. Then she took one step back from the door and said, "Come inside." "I need to." "You are bleeding heavily," she said. Her voice was very quiet and very level. "Come inside." He came inside. The suite's inner room was large by Summit standards, designed for a high-level delegate, a work table, a low seating arrangement, a communications panel on the north wall with the continuance's diplomatic encoding access built into the interface. A Chauvel crossed to the communications panel the moment the door sealed and spoke quickly in Vorath, brief, clipped, the cadence of someone giving instructions they had thought through before they started speaking. Then she switched to standard and transmitted the alert exactly as he had described it, the words precise and unembellished. Active threat, East Service corridor, weapon class, direction of flight. Her detail lead's response came back in 9 seconds. She gave the location confirmation and set down the panel. Then she turned to him. He had sat down on the floor against the wall near the door, because it had become apparent that standing was consuming a degree of concentration he preferred to allocate to other priorities. The cut was along his left side, deep enough to be serious. He could feel the distinction between minor and significant in the specific character of the pain, which was not the sharp brightness of a surface wound, but a dull, heavy persistence that told him the tissue damage was real. He had pressed his right hand against the wound. His hand was very red. She came and knelt in front of him. Up close, her eyes were more complex than they had appeared in the corridor. The amber had depth to it, layer beneath layer, the fracturing at the iris catching the room's ambient light in a way that shifted as she moved. She was not performing calm. She was actually calm, which was a different thing, and he could see it in the quality of her stillness, which was the same efficiency he used himself when the margin required it. No wasted motion. No wasted attention. "Where is the medical kit?" he said. "I don't know. This is not my suite." "Right side of the communications panel. Second cabinet down, usually." "If it's not there, check the first cabinet on the left wall. Summit standard rooms carry 2. She was on her feet and across the room before he finished the sentence, and back in 38 seconds with a compact field kit, which she opened on the floor in front of him and assessed with the same rapid inventory she gave everything. Wound sealing strips, pressure gauze, topical analgesic block. I have nothing for deep tissue repair. The strips and gauze are enough to stabilize it until the medical team arrives. The topical block goes in first. The applicator is the cylinder with the blue end. You press it along the wound line, not into it. She found the applicator, like this. Parallel to the wound, not too much pressure. She did it correctly. He felt the analgesics effect begin within 20 seconds, the pain's intensity shifting register, dulling at the edges while the deep ache remained. She was already opening the wound sealing strips. "Place them across the cut, not along it," he said. "Start at the edge where the depth is greatest, that's toward your left." She looked at the wound, determined the edge he meant, and began. She placed each strip with exact, deliberate pressure, not hurrying, not hesitating, the steadiness of her hands a product of genuine concentration rather than practiced indifference. He watched her work. "Good," he said. "The next one higher, just overlapping the edge of the last." "How many?" "As many as it takes to close the surface. You'll know when it's holding." She placed 4 strips and assessed the result with a tilt of her head that suggested she was applying the same visual standard she would apply to anything else she was evaluating for functional adequacy. Then she opened the pressure gauze, positioned it, and pressed. "Pressure," he confirmed. "I have pressure." "More." She increased it without flinching. "Good," he said. "That's good." She looked up from the wound at that, the first time she had looked at him since she began rather than at what her hands were doing. Her eyes met his. "You should not be telling me that I have done something excellent," she said, "by applying medical pressure correctly. You did it correctly and quickly. That matters. You were telling me what to do. You were following the instructions correctly and quickly," he said. "In a situation with significant sensory interference, that matters." She looked at him for a moment, something shifting in her expression that he couldn't fully classify. Then she looked back down at her hands. "You stepped in front of it," she said. He didn't answer immediately. The analgesic was doing its work, which meant the pain's acuity was reduced enough that he could think around it. "It was heading for you," he said. "Yes." A pause. "I had opened the door early because a relay message said the session had been moved forward 20 minutes. No one told my detail. I came through the corridor alone." "Who sent the relay message?" "I don't know. My detail lead is trying to trace it now." Another pause. "If you had not been in that corridor." "I was in that corridor." "Because you walked the route this morning, on your own time." He didn't say the work doesn't pause because the shift does. She had that already. It would have been repetition. He said instead, "The route was wrong in a way I hadn't fully mapped yet. I needed to walk it." "And you noticed it was wrong because you had been watching the crowd texture since the first day." She was still looking at her hands, both of them pressing the gauze against his side with steady, unbroken pressure. "And you noticed the crowd texture because that is how you work, not from the filed briefings, not from the intelligence summary, but from the room itself, from what you see when you pay attention." He was quiet. "I have been protected by a great many people over the course of my role," she said, in the same level voice she used for everything. "Professionals, careful people, good people, most of them." She paused. "You are different from them in a way I have been trying to characterize since the first evening." "What have you concluded?" She looked up at him. "That I haven't concluded yet. I am still watching." The medical team arrived at 9 minutes and 40 seconds. He tracked it, which was the kind of operational habit that didn't stop under pressure. They came through the door with 2 members of the station security team and one of a Chavel's detail, and the lead physician, a Keth station doctor named Orvath, whose communication style had been calibrated over what appeared to be a long career to convey information rather than comfort, crossed the room fast and knelt at Rin's side, and assessed the wound with a brisk efficiency that Rin found easier to tolerate than the alternative. "How long has it been open?" "Just under 10 minutes. "Who applied the field kit?" "I did," a Chavel said. She was still on the floor, still holding the pressure gauze, and she looked at Orvath with the composure she maintained in every other context, not defensive, not seeking approval, just factual. Orvath assessed the placement of the wound sealing strips and the gauze position with a practiced eye. "Good pressure and correct strip placement. You've preserved the field." He looked at her with the mild professional appreciation of someone who encountered varied quality in crisis first aid and was noting the better end of the range. "The deep tissue needs the treatment bay. He needs to move." "I understand," she said. "I will come with him." Rin's team lead, Jansen, a solid woman who had worked 2 prior summits with him, and whose face habitually carried an expression of considered neutrality, looked across the room at him with an expression that, for Jansen, constituted significant surprise. "Sovereign," said her detail lead, stepping forward from the door, "the session schedule." "We'll continue under the session chairs," she said, in the tone that needed no emphasis because it had never required emphasis. "Please communicate that I have been detained by a security event and will rejoin at the earliest practicable time. Give them no further specifics." She looked at Rin. "Can you stand?" Yes, he could with effort. Orvath guided him up on one side and Jansen moved to the other, and he was vertical, and the wound's weight settled differently in that position but remained manageable. Chavel stood as well. She walked with him to the treatment bay. The treatment bay was a mid-ring facility that ran at the functional middle of the station's medical capacity, larger than a field kit, smaller than a full hospital service. Orvath worked with a quiet competence that Rin found professionally legible. The topical block was deepened first, a more sophisticated compound than the field kit's version, which changed the pain's register significantly without eliminating it entirely. Then the deep tissue sealing, which was a 20-minute procedure that required Rin to lie still and manage his own reactions to what was happening, which was within his capacity if not his preference. Then the closure and the dressing. Chavel sat in the chair in the corner of the bay for all of it. She was not in the way, she was not hovering. When Orvath had come through the door he had pointed at the chair in the way. A physician pointed at chairs when they intended things to proceed in a particular order regardless of the preferences of anyone else in the room, and she had sat without comment. She sat with the composure that appeared to be her baseline, not the composure of someone suppressing an emotion, but of someone whose default relationship with difficult situations was attention. She watched what Orvath was doing with the same clear, registering focus she gave everything. She asked one question about halfway through: "Is the tissue damage permanent?" "No," Orvath said without looking up. "Didn't catch anything structural. Full function in 3 weeks, standard activity restrictions in the interim." "Good," she said, in the way she said things when she meant them rather than as a social acknowledgement. She went back to watching. The bay's ambient lighting was a warm amber, which Rin registered with some part of his mind that was not occupied with the procedure. The station's medical facilities adjusted their environmental register for the primary occupant species when in use, a courtesy designed into the station's systems, small and practical. The Voreth High Register, according to the species brief he had read before the summit, favored warm amber tones in spaces meant for recovery. He had not thought about that in advance. He thought about it now, lying on the examination pallet under the amber light, watching her sit in the corner chair with her hands in her lap, and her white hair slightly loose from the formal arrangement. One strand along her jaw that she hadn't moved to push back, which was the first time in 3 days he had seen anything about her appearance that could be called unremedied. After Orvath finished the closure and moved to write the discharge documentation at the room's far end, there was a stretch of quiet in the bay. The station's ambient sound came through the hull, distant, low, the specific hum that pressurized space produced when everything was functioning correctly. Orvath wrote steadily and without looking up. Chavel sat in the corner chair and did not look at Orvath. She looked at Rin, in the same way she had been looking at him for 3 days, directly, registering, as though she was still in the process of arriving at a conclusion and intended to continue until she had. He looked back. "They built a file on me," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at the north wall, not at him. "Not just tonight's event. Before the summit, I was made aware that certain elements within 2 of the participating systems considered my attendance a tactical complication for their preferred outcomes in the accords. The specific concern was that the continuance's position on the resource-sharing clauses would anchor the moderate bloc and prevent the kind of fractured vote that those elements were prepared to capitalize on." She said it in the same even, factual register she used for everything, no drama, no performance of distress. My government's assessment was that the risk level was within acceptable parameters for an event of this type, with summit standard security protocols in place. He was quiet for a moment. Your government's assessment was wrong. Yes, a brief pause. I should have communicated the specifics to the summit security coordination. I didn't. Why not? She turned to look at him then. He was lying on the pallet with a dressing on his left side, and no particularly strong position from which to make this exchange formal, which meant it was just the two of them in a room saying the true things. Because the intelligence assessment was classified at a level that made sharing it with an external security office legally complicated, she said. And because I was advised that disclosing it might be interpreted by other delegations as an attempt to shift the Accord's agenda by introducing a security narrative. And you chose to protect the summit process. Yes, at the cost of your own security. She held his gaze. I chose to allow my government's assessed adequate security protocols to stand rather than add a layer that would create political complexity. A pause. In retrospect, that was a miscalculation. Yes, he said, it was. She absorbed this without moving. He had expected not quite deflection, but the natural softening that most people applied when they were being told they had made a mistake in a situation that had resulted in harm to someone else. She did not apply it. If I had communicated it, she said, what would you have done differently? I would have run a named threat protocol for your transit routes rather than a general alert elevation. That would have given me 2 people on every inner ring corridor crossing instead of 1. The junction this morning would have had secondary coverage that didn't depend on a single early walk. But you walked it anyway. I walked it because the texture was wrong. Not because I knew there was a named threat. She was quiet for a long moment. I keep returning to that, she said. You had the substantive knowledge before you had the documented knowledge. The pattern in the crowd, the movement in the east node, the relay log angle on the camera grid, you were building the picture from what you could see rather than from what you had been told to look for. It's not unusual in this work. I think it is more unusual than you know, she said quietly. What makes you say that? Because I have been protected by many people, as I told you in the suite, and none of them have walked a route on their own time on the 3rd day of a summit that had not yet produced an intelligence item, and then been at the precise junction where that route's logic said to be, and moved without calculation when the moment came. She paused. I am not dismissing the people who came before. They were professionals, but they were reading the briefing. You were reading the room. He looked at her. The amber light lay across her face in a way that made the faint bioluminescence along her jaw visible. A pale gold, very low, what the species brief had described as an autonomic response associated with high emotional engagement. He had known that detail from the brief. He had not known what it would look like from 3 feet away. There is something I want to ask you, she said. Go ahead. When you stepped in front of the blade, in your account of it, the account you gave yourself, not the one you'll put in a report, was it a calculated action? Did you assess the angles, determine interception was the highest probability protective outcome, and execute? He thought about it honestly. He had built the habit of honesty about this kind of question across 11 years, because the alternative was to lose the ability to assess his own judgment accurately, which was the only real tool he had. No, he said, you were there and the blade was moving and I moved. I can reconstruct the angle geometry afterward, and when I do it the intercept makes sense, but I wasn't calculating while I was moving. You just moved. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. In Vorath, she said, there is a designation for that, the act of placing oneself in the path of harm for another without calculation. Not duty, not professional obligation, not a risk assessment that happened to include one's own body as an acceptable cost. The act itself, the motion that comes before the thinking. She paused. I don't know the standard equivalent. I don't think there is one. He waited. I have only seen it a few times, she said, in my life. In my position, which puts me in proximity to people who protect others as their work, people who are very good at that work. She looked at him with the amber eyes that caught the beige light and fractured it. I have never been the person for whom it was done. He said after a moment, You stayed. Yes. You did not have to. No, she said, I did not want to be elsewhere. She said it very simply, not as an emotional declaration, not as something she had prepared, as a statement of fact that she had arrived at while sitting in the corner chair watching Orvath work, and which she now offered without performance. He held it for a moment, because it required holding. What is the word? He said. She looked at him. I already told you. I don't think it translates cleanly. Tell me the Vorath word. A pause. Sorvith, she said. It means the act itself, the motion without calculation, but also in extended usage the recognition of that act, the naming of it. She paused. In Vorath, things that are worth recognizing must first be able to be spoken, otherwise they pass without record. He said nothing for a moment. He was learning the word, in the specific way he had spent 11 years learning things, by holding them until they were fixed. I understand the word, he said. Something moved across her face. I thought you would. Orvath discharged him at 1400 with a restricted activity profile. Inner ring postings only, no extended transit routes until he was cleared the following morning, modified hours. Rin noted the profile, and intended to follow it with the specific practicality that a summit on its final evening required. The threat in the corridor had been resolved during the bay time. Jansen's message came in at 1310. The station security team had the operative in detention in the East Wing. The relay message that had brought a Chauvel through the door early and alone had been traced to a station communications junction that had been accessed by the same figure from the overnight camera log. The case was with the ICC's Security Protocols Division. There would be a review. There were always reviews. And the review would take months and produce a document that would be filed in the security authorities' records and almost certainly result in a procedural amendment. That was the correct outcome for this kind of event. Rin would contribute his notes to the review and then go back to work. A Chauvel's detail lead was waiting outside the bay. He was a Vorath man named Varath Ol, not the same name as the planet, though Rin had done a brief double-take on first reading the staff list, who had the specific competence and the specific controlled frustration of someone very good at his work, who had just experienced the worst possible intersection of his principal's independence and an active threat. She spoke with him for 3 minutes in Vorath. Rin couldn't follow the language, but he could read the exchange, the detail lead's restrained professional recalibration, her clear and apparently complete accounting, the moment when his response shifted from controlled frustration to professional resolution. Then she switched to standard and said, "Tell the session chairs I will rejoin the plenary at 1500. The session has been held sovereign. They delayed it." She absorbed this. Then at 1500, she looked at Rin. "Are you cleared for a posting tonight?" "Inner ring. Standing position. Then you will manage the inner corridor for the evening reception." Jansen, who had appeared at some point near Rin's left shoulder with the timing she always had for moments like this, said, in the perfectly flat voice she reserved for professional observations that were also jokes, "That is technically a demotion. It is a posting within appropriate medical parameters," a Chauvel said, in the perfectly composed voice of someone who had classified the observation and found it insufficient. She looked at Rin. "Will you be at the east entrance this evening?" "Yes." "Good." She walked with her detail toward the plenary hall. He stood in the corridor for a moment after she turned the corner. His left side ached with the specific quality of something healing rather than something open, which was an improvement in the direction he wanted. Jansen came to stand beside him. She was quiet for a moment in the manner she used when she was deciding whether the next thing needed to be said. "She didn't leave," Jansen said. "No. I was outside the bay the entire time. She didn't come out." "I know." Orveth said she held the pressure for 4.5 minutes without being prompted to maintain it. "I know that too." Jansen was quiet for a longer moment. Then, "You've been doing this for 11 years. "Yes." "I've worked with you for 3 of them. "Yes." "I have never seen you look at a principal the way you look at her." He didn't answer. "All right," Jansen said for the second time in their working relationship. The first had been 2 summits ago, a different situation, the same tone. The tone of a conclusion reached and deliberately not pressed. She patted him once on the right shoulder, careful of his left side. "Sleep for 2 hours. I have the inner ring." 1 hour. 2, she said and walked away. He went to his quarters. He lay on the bunk for 90 minutes, which was the compromise he could accept, and he thought about a word in a language he didn't speak, for an act he had performed without calculation, in a corridor where he had been standing because he had walked a route on his own time because the texture was wrong. He thought about the way she had looked at him when she said she did not want to be elsewhere. He got up and went to his post. He was at the east entrance by 1700. The summit's final evening reception was the kind of event that his profession treated as a graduated security challenge. High profile, high attendance, but also the point at which every protection detail was at its densest deployment. The station security grid was at its most saturated, and the specific elevated threat of the morning had been resolved. The risk was not zero. It was never zero, but it was at the lower end of the summit's risk curve. His posting was procedural, he knew that. He stood at the east entrance and watched the delegate traffic and confirmed the route timing and exchanged 3 short communications with Jansen over the course of 2 hours, and none of them indicated anything more serious than a pacing adjustment for the Trevani delegation's late arrival. She came through the east entrance at 1756, 4 minutes ahead of her scheduled arrival. She was in formal dress, the navy and silver in a more elaborate arrangement than the working sessions required, her white hair in the full formal style, the rank indicator along her collar in its deepest silver. She came with her full detail in formation and 2 advisors. It was the configuration for a closing ceremony, correct and complete, and she moved within it with the efficiency he had been watching for 3 days. She stopped 3 feet from him. The advisors moved forward, giving the professional distance that said they were aware this was a separate conversation. Her detail held 6 feet back. She looked at him with the amber eyes that fractured light into layers, and in the reception hall's warm illumination, he could see the bioluminescent line along her jaw clearly. Not the barely visible threshold of the treatment bay's close examination, but clear, present, warm gold. "You are standing," she said. "That was the plan. You look better than you did at 1400. Acceptable baseline." The corner of her mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, or perhaps was a smile in the Voreth register he hadn't fully learned to read yet. "The summit closes tonight," she said. "Yes. My delegation departs tomorrow morning, early transit, 600. "I'm aware. Will you be at the departure transit?" He had not been scheduled to be. The departure coverage was outer ring, and he was inner ring until morning clearance. "I'll arrange to be." She was quiet for a moment. "I have been trying to find the correct way to express what I want to say," she said, in the same direct tone she used for everything. "In Standard, in Vorath, I have the vocabulary. In Standard, the words available to me don't carry what I mean." "You told me the Vorath word," he said. Yes. Tell me what it means in extended use. She looked at him. You remember it. I keep things that matter. She held his gaze for a moment. The reception noise continued around them, the distant sound of the hall filling with 9 delegations and the hum of a summit concluding its work. And she stood in the middle of it with the same quality of stillness she had shown in every other space they had shared. Sorvith, she said, in extended use, the act itself, the motion without calculation, and also in its secondary meaning the record of such an act, the naming of it, so it doesn't pass without acknowledgement. In Vorath, we believe that things which deserve to be recognized must first be able to be spoken. Then I understand the word fully now, he said. I thought you would. A pause. I have been thinking since the treatment bay about what I want to say to you that is true and specific and not a generality about duty or protection. And what I have arrived at is this. There was a junction in a corridor this morning, and you were there because you had paid attention to a texture in a crowd across 3 days, and walked a route on your own time, and arrived at the correct point before the intelligence had confirmed why you should be there. And when the moment came, you moved. Not because of any of those things, not from the route map, not from the texture read, not from the professional obligation. You moved because I was there and the harm was moving toward me. He didn't look away. Yes. That is Sorvith, she said. I want you to know that I understand what was done, not the record of it, not the commendation the continuance will file with the security authority, the act itself. He held what she had said for a moment. The warm light of the reception lay across both of them. The bioluminescence along her jaw had brightened slightly. Thank you, he said. He meant it in the way that people said that word when they were not performing gratitude but offering it, which was a different act entirely. She walked into the reception. He stood outside the door for the last 3 hours of the summit. The reception went the way closing receptions went. The formal summaries, the carefully worded declarations, the 9 delegations performing the particular kind of satisfaction that was appropriate when agreements had been reached, and everyone involved understood how provisional and contested those agreements remained beneath the ceremony. He listened to the sound of it through the door, the murmur of 9 languages in simultaneous translation, the structured applause that marked the formal moments, the change in register when the ceremony closed and the event became social. He was aware, through all of it, of the specific quality of something that had been building across 3 days, settling into a shape he could name. He had named it with a word in a language he didn't speak. He was still learning what it meant in its full extension. The departure transit was at 600. He had cleared the inner departure vestibule posting with Jansen at 2200 the night before, technically within his modified profile, given that he would be standing rather than walking a route. And she had looked at him for a moment, and then confirmed it without comment, which was the specific kind of support she had provided across 3 summits together, and which he valued more than he had words for. He was at the vestibule by 5:45. The Vorath delegation arrived at 5:54 in full formation. 4 detail members, 3 advisors, the communications lead, the 2 session chairs who had represented the continuance through the week. A high-level departure configuration, efficient, formal, the closing sequence of a summit-level political engagement. Rin stood at his post and did the work of his post and watched the formation come through the inner corridor door. A Chauvel came at the end of the formation and stopped when she reached him. The vestibule was not empty. Her detail held 6 feet back. Departure processing staff were at their stations. 2 station security personnel were at the outer door. Whatever she was going to say, she would say it with witnesses, and she appeared to have considered this and arrived at the conclusion that it was acceptable. I want you to know, she said in standard with the clarity she gave everything, that the continuance will be formally commending this posting to the Summit Security Authority. The route analysis, the corridor reassessment filings, the morning walk and the preventive action, All of it will be in the formal record. She paused. And separately, not as a function of protocol, but as a function of wanting you to know I am aware of what was done, not the official account of it, the act itself. I know, he said. You moved without calculation. Yes. She held his eyes. You were at that junction because you had walked the route on your own time, because you had been reading the texture of the crowd since the first day, because 11 years of paying attention to things before they could be documented had taken you to the precise point where the matter required you to be. And you moved because I was there, not because of the 11 years. A pause. Both of those things are true simultaneously. I wanted to say them both. Both are accurate, he said. And when I asked you if it was a calculated action, you told me it was not. She looked at him steadily. You could have given me the version that sounds more professional. Most people would. It wouldn't have been true. No, a beat. It would not. The departure clock on the vestibule wall read 5:58. When does your posting rotate? She said. This summit closes tonight formally. I have 2 weeks before the next assignment. Is the next assignment fixed? Not yet. She looked at him. The vestibule's lighting was the station's standard morning register, cool, functional, none of the amber warmth of the treatment bay. It did nothing to diminish the way the bioluminescence along her jaw showed, clear and warm in the functional light. The continuance has diplomatic traffic through this sector in 3 weeks, she said. The security lead for that transit has not been assigned. He held her gaze for a moment. The morning light between them was very still. Is that a formal request through the appropriate channels? He said. It is a thing I am telling you, she said, in a corridor before a departure in the same way that you filed a security note on your own time. A pause. Without going through the channels, directly. The quality of what she said settled over him, the way things settled when they were true. I'll put in for the transit, he said. Something moved across her face, the warmth he had seen once before in a treatment bay when she had said, and I did not want to be elsewhere, not performed, not offered as courtesy, genuine and direct, the way everything she said to him was direct. Good, she said. She walked to the departure gate. He watched her go. The formation moved through the gate, and the outer door sealed with the sound of pressurized separation, and the vestibule's ambient noise settled back to the station's baseline. The life support hum, the distant sound of the outer ring, the specific quality of quiet that a summit corridor had when the summit was ending. Jansen materialized at his elbow. That was not a standard departure exchange, she said. No. She's requesting you for the diplomatic transit. The assignment hasn't been formalized yet. But you're putting in for it. Yes. Jansen considered this. Her face was performing the expression of concluded thought that she used when the conclusion was clear, and she had decided not to say it out loud. She was quiet for a moment. You've been doing this for 11 years, she said finally. Yes. You walked a route on your own time on the 3rd day of a summit with no named threat, and got to the right junction 17 minutes before the only moment it mattered. And when you came out of the treatment bay, she was still in the corner chair. He didn't say anything. And now you're putting in for a diplomatic transit in 3 weeks that was not on your assignment sheet, and is not your standard posting type. Yes. All right, Jansen said, 3rd time across their working relationship, same tone, same deliberate not pressing. She patted him once on the right shoulder, careful of his left side, and walked back toward the inner ring. He stood in the vestibule for a moment longer. Through the outer window, the Voreth transport was lifting from the docking arm. A long vessel, the continuance's deep navy along the hull, the pale silver of the rank insignia visible even at this distance, climbing away from the station's gravity well on pale blue thrusters toward open space. He watched it until it cleared the outer ring. Then he went to his bunk, and picked up the assignment request form and filled in the details of the continuance's diplomatic transit. In the notes field, where the system asked for rationale, he sat for a moment. Then he wrote a single word. Sorvith. He looked at it for a moment, the word for the act itself, the motion without calculation, and also in extended use, the record. The naming, so that the thing which deserved to be recognized could first be spoken. He filed the request. Outside the window, the transport had cleared the ring. He couldn't see it anymore. In 3 weeks it would be back in this sector, or something of the continuances would be, and there would be a transit to lead, and he would lead it. He thought about amber eyes that fractured light into layers. He thought about pale gold bioluminescence in a functional vestibule, visible in the morning light. He thought about a word in a language he didn't speak, for an act he hadn't calculated. He put the form in the outbox and went to do his post.